and welcome to the 8th episode of Seen It First, brought to you by Fictionary, your story editing software. In this series, we sit down with best-selling, award-winning authors to talk about first scenes, discuss writing craft, and celebrate the stories that thrill and inspire us all. My name is James Gallagher. I'm a Fictionary certified story coach and copy editor, and tonight we are very happy to welcome psychological horror author, among many other things, L. Marie Wood. So for the next half hour, we're going to talk to Lisa about her writing. We're going to look at the first scene from her story, Telecommuting. And at the end of the episode, we're going to be able to take some questions from the audience, but this can be interactive as well. So you have questions at any time, raise your hand or drop a question in the chat, and we will do our best to get to those. I'm going to do a little break from the usual introduction and introduce everyone to this publication, 160 Black women in horror, of which Lisa is one. So to get started, I'd like to read her entry from that publication. It's a 2023 publication from Samiko Salson, who is herself a Stoker-nominated poetess. And I'll read that now, but this is a great little publication to refamiliarize yourself with authors that you already know and to explore authors you may not be as familiar with. So it's also a great way to fill out your reading list and explore new authors. L. Marie Wood is a two-time Bram Stoker Award and Riesling-nominated author, screenwriter, essayist, and poet. She writes high-concept fiction that includes elements of psychological horror, mystery, dark fantasy, and romance. Golden Stake Award winner for her novel, The Promise Keeper, recipient of the Nico Award, and has won Best Horror, Best Action, Best Afrofuturism, Horror, Sci-Fi, and Best Short Screenplay Awards in both national and international film festivals. Wood has penned short fiction that has been published in groundbreaking works, including the anthologies Sycorax's Daughters and Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir. She is also part of the 2022 BookFest award-winning poetry anthology, Under Her Skin. Wood is the founder of the Speculative Fiction Academy, an English and creative writing professor, and a horror scholar. So we are very excited to have you here tonight. Lisa, how are you?
I'm well. That's a really cool thing to listen to. I'm just going to say, okay, I was hoping that didn't happen. I'm going to cut this phone off. There is one app on the phone that has the most obnoxious ring.
It's going to happen now.
And the other ones I can usually get by with. Of course, I can't cut the phone off, right? It's the one that the other ones you never hear, right? This one though, it was so loud to me that I couldn't stand it. Anyway, back to I've cut it off. Sorry about that. But that is such a cool bio to listen to, because you don't realize what, all the little things you've done until you hear somebody else like say it. So thanks for that. Yeah, I'm good. After hearing that, I'm especially good.
Yeah, well, it's great because you read that list and you see like, well, there's people where you might imagine you have more hours in the day than anyone else. You do a lot of stuff.
Oh yes. And what happens is I will burn the candle at both ends for 3-4 days, and then that 5th day it's like, did she get up at all? I'm asleep all day long because I can't, but I feel when I feel like I need to write, I need to write. It doesn't really matter what time of day. I often do a lot of writing at 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I still have to work, so I pay for it, but it's worth it.
Yeah. And I want to get into your horror writing, and I'm a lifelong horror fan, but I also edit and copy edit a lot of romance, and you have a really cool essay called Doppelgangers in Need, about horror and romance. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how those two things intersect, and because so many people think of them as completely opposite genres, but they actually have a lot more in common than people might suspect.
It's true. And it's like, as a psychological horror, and I've been a psychological horror author since I was 5, and I wish I was kidding. I scared my mother and grandmother just deeply to their cores. And you know, but I've really been writing this stuff for years. Romance, because psychological horror touches on so many different genres and then subgenres within horror, I've had the chance to sort of dabble in a lot of different things. And I kept thinking, why do people think that these two genres are so different? And you can see it in every way. I mean, horror movies versus, you know, romance movies, or, you know, just anyway, it's like the two fandoms are sort of pitted against each other. And I don't get it, because they're both deep emotion. They are both deep emotion. Once you think of it on that level, the differences are less and less. I mean, fewer and fewer, because obsession, that's a staple in romance fiction. Do you think it's not in horror fiction? You know, it's the response that occurs afterwards, what you decide to do once you realize that you are, you know, now you're off the side of the road here, and you've gone beyond where you should. What's your next step? If it's going to be realistic fiction, realistic horror, that person may, you know, take up a knife and do what he's going to do. But if it's going to be romance, you're going to stalk, and then you may still take up a knife. I mean, what do you think thrillers are? We get to that point in so many different genres. So they're all sort of woven together, and it's just a matter of marketing, I think, that changes the dynamic for people. And so people don't realize, oh, I've been marketed to me. Because think about this. Back in the 80s, Stephen King's Cemetery, no, the one with Pet Cemetery, that was marketed as a thriller. We've seen that movie. That's not a thriller. Like in any stretch of the imagination, it's just not. And it was marketed as a thriller. So it's all marketing. And I can't blame the industry, because you have to know where to shelve books. But I wonder, what did we do in the 40s and 50s when we were shelving books? And how was it done? Today you see Octavia Butler in the African American book section, but you don't necessarily find her in the science fiction section or fantasy, if you want. If you never see Kindred in the horror section. So but that's a missed marketing. That's completely missed marketing. And the same goes for this sort of wedge that's placed between horror and romance. Now, there's an interesting thing that's occurred, is that there's a paranormal romance that's come up, but
yes,
not quite the same as horror and romance intersecting as genre and subgenre. That's a whole different sort of genre. I mean, it's a romance genre. It's not a horror genre. If we come in there and just wreak havoc the way that we would want to as horror writers, the romance fans are not having that. Not in the way that is expected for romance. The whole happily ever after and things like that. We don't care about that in horror fiction. There's no happily ever after, but unless you want there to be, and then that's wholly unrealistic for most of us. But anyway, so it's not the same thing. And I think that some people try to say, okay, well, sure, it's emotion. Let's point you in the direction of paranormal romance, but that's not what I meant. That's more to me. Paranormal romance really feels like fantasy with romance elements and horror elements, because of the beast connections that are happening. I mean, some of the romantic combinations are amazing, but I never would have thought of that in my horror world. And I don't know pure romance writers who would have come up with that either. So it's different.
Like and different.
I'm so amazed sometimes. I'm like, okay, if that's going to happen, I think I might need to read that. But it's interesting, but at the same time, it's sad, because I think that if we would all just realize that all of these genres work together, there's pure terror in mystery, there's pure terror in, thriller. I mean, I don't know. I think the world would be different in terms of how we look at writing and what we think we like, because so many people enjoy horror, but they don't realize that they do. They don't even give themselves a chance.
Well, I think too, one thing that romance and horror has in common is that from the reader's perspective, I think readers are aware that there's a wide part of the reading public that dismisses their genre or looks down on it. And for someone who loves horror, someone who loves romance, the stories in your life are at times literally life-saving. So I think in some ways it creates this us against the world kind of feeling when you're writing in one of those genres. Like, do you feel that?
I do. But at the same time, being the one who's in the horror genre, if you're in the romance genre, you are faring a lot better than the folks who are in the horror genre. Romance is a lot more accepted in the world than
Yeah.
horror is. And so when being in this, it's us against the world, but say it with a little more, like with your entire chest, and you're not going to feel as excited about it. You're going to be a little frustrated by it sometimes. And that's fact. And it movies do a better job and a worse job, right? They are more in the forefront. Someone's probably more apt to watch a horror movie as opposed to read a horror book. And so therefore, if you think it's all slasher, if you think it's all blood, and you think it's all gore, there's a movie for you that will illustrate all of that. The psychological horror movie you may not want to put the attention into, because it's not going to be gory because you were thinking gore, and it's not a monster per se. It's not it's a little thriller, but it's not enough for you because that's not what you wanted. You wanted this thing that horror represents, but not all horror represents that. And so we feel a little marginalized as a genre. We feel kind of just there's and it's a shame because there's good writing everywhere. I mean, I have read some phenomenal work that's coming out of the horror, and I write the quiet psychological stuff. I don't even think I read the gore stuff in large part anymore. I think, and I definitely don't watch it. I saw that movie Hostel years ago, and I'm like, that's it, really, that's it, and I can't. And it's funny sounding coming from someone who's telling you they're a horror author, but it's the truth. We're not all the same, so it's difficult. And I find it interesting is that when someone meets me, and this is me all day, I laugh at my own jokes. I find myself hilarious, first of all. And, I wear orange glasses. They don't match anything I'm wearing, but so what? Oh, they match my necklace. This is orange too. So that's me all day. And when people meet me, if they don't know that I write horror fiction, they do not believe me. They outright think I'm kidding and just don't want to tell them what I'm working on. And I'm like, really? What do you think we look like? I mean, what do you think we look like? If you go to the Horror Writers Association convention, like the Stoker Con, everybody's walking around looking like me. We're not dressed in costume. I mean, what do you think is happening? So,
and often some of the nicest people in the world. Very generous.
Totally. So, I mean, it's us against the world, but not necessarily in the most positive light.
Well, do you also feel, because I introduced this with the 160 Black women in horror, and I saw another interview you did with for the Horror Writers Association, where you talked about as a Black woman horror author, that feeling of kind of in a field that a genre that hasn't always been as diverse as it is more diverse now, but you've talked about sort of kicking the door in and having your voice heard. So, how do you I'd love to hear a little bit about that, because that's really important.
Yeah, and the bad thing is it's not just horror fiction. We'll talk about that, of course, but Erica, you've got to come one day if you're interested in stuff like that. We have a blast. But sorry, I digress. I was reading the chat real quick. But if it's all genre. I mean, I've seen it in fantasy, I've seen it in science fiction as well. But as someone who identifies as a psychological horror author, I guess that's a thing. I'm making that a thing right now. I absolutely see it. And while I have not necessarily felt some of or experienced some of the barriers that my fellow colleagues who are Black women have, there are none of. I've been in the HWA. I've been writing horror fiction publishing. I've been writing since I was 5, I told you, but I've been publishing horror fiction since 98, 99, something like that. So a long time. And I've been part of the HWA for decades, like just decades. And at first it was just Linda Addison. She's a horror poet. First Black woman to ever win the Stoker Award. Last Black woman so far. We still haven't had another one, and she won it 15 years ago. Yeah, and so and then there was me and Sumiko, and then no one for years and years, just years and years and years. And I don't understand that, because of course Black women write horror fiction. Of course Black women write fantasy. Of course we write all things. So how, it's not that the HWA excluded us, but it's a recognition of the fact that we're out there that doesn't exist. And that same thing is still happening. It's better. It's so much better now. But we've had to work really hard to sort of toot our own horn and make sure that people do see us. And some of that is, marketing is tough. It's difficult. And we thought social media was going to be wonderful, but now look what's happened. We all know what's going on. It's not the same wonderful place we thought it was going to be. And, there's a lot of things that each of us feel that, you have to do to create a literary landscape and have a legitimate canon. And then there's good work, there's bad work, there's mediocre work, there's work in progress. We all know this. So you've had to keep going and working and striving, and along the way people fall off. And yes, it happens in every community, but it's as though many people just don't believe that Black women write horror fiction. I can add on to that. Many people don't believe that Black people read horror fiction, male or female, doesn't matter. And I've encountered that in real life, people who are not writers, I've encountered that. And I've been like, really? Because I've been looked at as strange for having written horror fiction. And a lot of us have encountered that. But so there's that whammy of, oh, I'm not supposed to be writing it, And then tack on women. Doesn't matter what kind of woman you are, where you're from, doesn't matter. Women don't write horror fiction. So I'm Black, I'm a woman, what is this? And it's just all so it's been difficult. So I'm happy to see the change. I have not, and if I've been up against something where I've lost a slot in an anthology or was slighted in some way that I didn't necessarily ascribe to me being a Black woman, shame on them, because they pull the wool over my eyes, but I don't, some of my colleagues truly have, and there was no question whatsoever that it was because they were a Black woman. And I don't get it. I don't get it in a general sense, because trauma, horror can be, some say horror is rooted in trauma. One of my good friends, R.J. Joseph, says horror is rooted in trauma. If that's the case, Black women might have a corner on that market. Right? Women in general definitely have a corner on that market.
I mean, read some typical person, right?
not to say anything, guys, you do have trauma, not to say you don't, but I mean, we're talking from childbirth to less money when we're working the same job, to disrespect because we want to work the job and have the child and have the family. Why can't we do all of it? Well, no, you're not supposed to. And not feeling that you're suited for a specific thing that you clearly continue to do, whatever that is. I mean, before being a full-time teacher and writer, I used to work as an IT project manager. And I also was the only woman for a long time and the only Black woman for my entire career, which spans 26 years. Okay. So what is this? And what is the bias that continues to occur? So I would just submit that women truly should be and can be writing horror fiction, because they're writing it from a place of understanding.
And I think sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where publishers publish a certain kind of thing and then they point to it and go, well, that's what's selling.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Oh, yes, we hear that as well. That's difficult, because how do you combat that? Well, it's not going to sell. And who's going to read it? Well, what makes you think that only Black women want to read it or Black people want to read it? I'm writing characters that are universal. I'm writing a character. I like to describe it as though I'm writing characters that meet in a supermarket. Now, that has nothing to do with race or, gender or anything. A religious affiliation. People go to the supermarket, there's food there. You need to buy the food to live. So we're all in the store together. Everyone should be able to relate to those people because it's a shared experience. I never understood the confusion or concern that would not sell because a Black woman penned it. But if I changed my name, that's the root of pen names. I mean, not necessarily mine. This is actually my name. Elmarie Wood is Lisa Wood. That's my name. This is my actual name. But to be honest, I thought Elmarie sounded cooler. whatever, I like it. And so, but
It's a cool name.
thank you, I like it. But some women would take a male pen name so that they could sell their work. This happened a lot in fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you shouldn't have to do that if you don't want to.
No. Now, I was also going to ask you about for any writers here that are, largely prose writers, but thinking about trying their hand at screenplay. I know you're a script writer as well. So do you have any advice and what are the big challenges there, especially if you're a prose writer and you're trying a very different form?
Yes, it is very different. It is very different. I can't, oh my gosh. It's a whole different way of thinking. In prose, we have all the space in the world. A book can be, what do we think? What do we think a minimum word count is? I've never really seen a 50,000 word novel that's promoted as a novel and not a novella, even though that's too big for a novella, but it's like that weird middle. But I'd say 60. Let's go with 60,000 word novel. Between 60, depending upon your genre, if you're fantasy, you can go up to 130,000 words, which I don't get. That's like a doorstop. But anyway, it happens. So you got that wide range of words you can just use to describe whatever. And you can go on and on about the color, the shade of gray. I mean, this is gray, a very light gray on my wall. You could do a page and a half about this shade versus a darker one. And it would be just fine because that's part of world building and really sucking a character in. Screenwriting, no, you don't have that space at all. You cannot talk about what someone thinks and feels because how can you see that? All you can talk about is what the character or the actor can demonstrate on film. So that's what you have to write. And that is not easy at all when you're used to stretching it out. Because we call it purple prose and it's fine. Well, it's not fine. You have to kind of trim yourself. You have restrictions, of course, but it's still allowed in prose. You can't have any of that in screenwriting. So just be prepared. Just know that it's not going to be the same. You're really going to have to trim quite a bit because you only have, every page is about a minute. That's not, don't hold me my feet to the fire, but that's just the industry standard with that. And so if that's 90 pages for an hour and a half movie, right? That's all you got. And it's not like it's full pages full of text where you're covering all the white space with everything. It's quite rigid, Courier font, bigger, which is bigger than what we're used to using. So you just don't have, it's like the space has to be used economically. And that's not easy. So just try it, but give yourself some grace because it's not going to be immediately, wow, I did it. I can just do this all the time. I'll give you one more bit of advice. If you have a novel or a short story and you think you'd like to turn it into a screenplay, yes, you can. That is the hardest thing I found to do ever. My first novel, I made into a screenplay. And I thought, well, I don't want to finish this. I'm never doing this again. And I won't ever do it again. I said that. I'm saying it now. You heard me say that. I don't want to do that again. But it's because you have to kill your darlings. And I've already killed some darlings to write the novel. You got to kill more. We got to focus on the main story and some of those subplots that were so important to build your characters and build the storyline and make it interesting in the novel. You got to let go of them because you can't have so many people on screen running around doing whatever. So.
And also as a psychological horror author, it's very interior, where a screenplay is all exterior, so that must be a challenge. Exactly. So we want to talk about the first scene from Telecommuting, and I thought an interesting thing to do is that because that has a male protagonist, so I thought maybe as a way to sort of set that up first, you could tell us because another interview you saw, I thought it was very interesting what you look for when you're representing women, but then also what you look for when you have a male protagonist and what the challenges are there.
Okay, so let me note to everyone who's listening, I don't even know what interview that is. Be careful. Be sure you say whatever you say out there is out there. I don't even know what interview that is. But the good thing is I always give the answer I mean, so I can answer it again. Yeah. I usually write stories from a male perspective, which is, I don't even know where that came from, to be honest. I don't know what that's about at all. You know, I mean, I just don't know, but it's what it is. And um, I go for the lived experience in a general sense. That whole idea about the supermarket is a very real perspective for me. So if I'm looking out my window and I see people jogging or running or, you know, walking a dog or whatever, what's my reaction to it? You know, oh, in fact, in telecommuting, there's a reaction to it that it's not mine, but it's someone else's reaction. It's not, you know, not everybody likes this kind of thing, right? So for me, I try to get to the essence of the actual character. I don't think necessarily of gender all the time, but there are some things I have to apply. And as a woman, I can write from the female perspective. I'm starting to dislike that word these days, but from the women's perspective. But from the male perspective, I've got to try and sense it, if you will. And to do that, I tap into, you know, what's the realistic response to something? What is the realistic response to something? So what I found is that, you know, it took a little while. And I think that the reason I might write from a male perspective is because I kind of teeter the edge of, I can see the what's one side and I can see the other side. You know, I'm able to tap into both because my reactions aren't always, you know, what, you know, someone might think of from a woman in a specific circumstance. I'm more often to run towards the issue than run away from it. Not to say women run away from it. I think that that's a very old stereotype, but today that's me. And so I can write that. And so if I just have to make the person a male because it suits the scenario, so be it. And so in that first scene, you know, the guy is alone, you know, and this was written oh my gosh, can you believe I wrote this pre-COVID? It
Oh,
was
really?
published. It was
I was thinking this was
published.
during COVID.
It was published during COVID. That was the date we had set already. For like
Wow.
months, I knew it was coming out. Then COVID hit. I'm like, people are gonna think I didn't. I wrote this thing a year and a half before.
Because it's like the perfect COVID novel. Like it seemed COVID.
It was scary how good that was. Like, you know, some moments you're like, wow, I think writers really do sense a couple of things. And yeah, that was a moment where I was like, that is creepy and wow. But
Well, I was going to say it was also when you mentioned that you were an IT manager, that
yeah,
because you read this and you nailed all the workplace stuff, you know. So
totally. Well, that part was like me, like legit me, because that's how these meetings go. Look, interesting. I've gotten the reviews from a couple of people who are like, I don't know what this is. It's so funny online. People are just, I don't know. You can't see them obviously, and they say the most terrible things. I'm like, okay, that's not your life, but there are so many project managers who are like, oh yes, I know. You know, this is exactly what it's like. So it's whatever. But in that first chapter, the guy's alone, and he's not just alone. It wasn't COVID related. So people who were going through, all of us who were going through COVID could get it, but that wasn't his reason. He got a job from home. There's a point in there I said something crass. I'm not going to repeat it now because that's also me. I blush when I think about the horrible things I've written down, but I will not say them out loud. But you know, he's home. He lost his fiance. He thought there was going to be all of this sort of fun going on when he's home, right? And it's gone. Now he's at this big house. And you know, that goes back to like the dot-com bubble that burst. I was a project manager then as well. All of us were spending this money we didn't actually have in our hands. It was all on the internet. And we were like, yes, this money's coming. People were buying houses and, you know, all of this wild stuff because we looked like millionaires. And then boom, it was gone, right? But he bought this big house and then she leaves him. Well, if you've read it, we can discuss those details, but she leaves him. He's alone. He needs a job to support this big old house he's bought. So he's got to put on the face. And if you've been a project manager for more than, I would say, 3 years, you know you're putting on the face because you're most often getting on that call like this. And then you've got to spring to and do it. So he was trying to figure out, am I blending into the wall? I've had this conversation so many times. Am I blending into the wall? I can't look at the sun in the middle of this, but if I shut the blinds, it looks like it's nighttime in here. You know, all of these different things, and you've got to try and decide, where is the suit? We just moved in here. Where's the suitcase? Oh, I can't believe I can't find the box. You know, and these are real things because just think about it. How early did you plan to get on this conference call? You know, I mean, our internet went out, just quick blip, went in and out. 10 minutes before I came on. I was like, no. So now I'm downstairs redoing the, unplugging stuff. And I'm like, that. So he's thinking, I've got all the time in the world until he doesn't. And he's got a minute or two. So he's not happy that he has to do this, but he totally has to do this. And we get to know him as a character in that, was it 5 pages? 3 to 5 pages. We know that he's not excited about this job. We know that he's not excited about his life at this moment, but it is a necessity. And that sets the stage for what happens to him as he goes along. So for me, it's a lived experience because I know people go through that. I made it set up a whole unique set of scenarios to occur for him. But lo and behold, I was somehow clairvoyant, and months later, all of us were in this scenario where we're stuck in the house and don't do anything. Especially later on in the book, there's a scene where he's talking to the UPS guy, and it was the most awkward conversation he was having. But that's happened to you before. It might not have been exactly that, but doggone well.
That's a great.
You have worn some terrible clothes to the door. Look, I've gone out in these terrible clothes. Look down. There's a hole in a spot. There should be no hole. And I'm embarrassed now, but I can do nothing about it. So I'll say something that's completely ridiculous and wonder, what does he think because I said that? So I try to keep my characters real, regardless of gender. And I guess that, whatever my genetic makeup, which allows me to have both sort of ideals in my head, I guess. I don't really know what to call it, but I can tap into it. And thank goodness, because it's working for me.
Well, and those, as like you said, some of the details in the first scene, like he's looking for his jacket, and then he's like, oh, I better not stand up because I look okay for the waist up, but I'm wearing these old sweatpants. And I think it's, horror, it's so important to ground the horror. So, what you do with the details of like sort of more mundane stuff, although very much like psychological pressures building on him, but also like this layering of like this other relationship stuff that is bubbling up as he's trying to concentrate on the interview. So I think it's a really great example, that scene of building psychological horror from like a very local place to then giving you that base for the the horrors that are going to follow too. So it's so well done.
Thank you. We all know what some of these things feel like, and I've often said, while I don't mind that 18 to 20, I want you to be 18 reading my stuff, because I say every now and then I'll just say something completely foul because I'm a grown adult, so I can say those things. I'm a grown adult. So I'm writing books for grown adults. And if you're 18 and you read it, I want you to be a grown adult. Why don't you wait till you're 25 with some experience, and then if I said something foul, it's not going to throw you off greatly. But in that same moment, if you're 25 and you were born in a certain time period, you also know what it's like to work from home. All of us do now, but prior to this moment, you know what it's like. And doggone well you had your PJs on. If that, okay, if that. I hope you had something on. You know what I mean? And if you get up, oh yes. I've stood up before, thank goodness I was fully dressed, but I stood up, and you don't realize that everyone's watching your whole midsection stand up. So if your shirt folded over and your stomach is somehow peeking through, everyone is seeing that before the shirt comes back down. And I it's like, good thing the camera's like half a second off, so I saw my own flesh, and I'm like, no. I sat right back down. Just like, nope, forget it. I can't even go over there and get this thing because I will not flash anyone else.
Yeah. Well, this flew by, and we're at the end of our half hour. So I want to ask anyone if they have any questions. And I was going to let everyone know too, next month in September, we're going to have editor Molly Rookwood come on to talk about anti-Semitic tropes in fantasy fiction. So I think it's a really important presentation. I think everyone's going to find that really informative. And there are, it's going to focus mostly on fantasy fiction, but horror fiction, you see a lot of that with vampire presentations. And so I think it's going to be a great presentation for everyone in October. We have the return of our very first guest, the great Jonathan Jans, to talk about the re-release of Children of the Dark and the upcoming release next year of the brand new Children of the Dark 2. And then in November, we're very excited to have Fictionary's own Nikki Davenport is going to talk about her debut novel, her debut romance. It's dropping in November. So we're really excited about that as well. So I want to give anybody a chance to have a question for Lisa.
There was one in the chat that I just saw go by, and Linda asked, "Where do I get my ideas?" Hopefully not from nightmares, and they're not nightmares. Thank goodness, like really, thank goodness. It literally is just life, though, which is a little scarier. So you could, I'm not looking for it on purpose, but there can be a facial expression that someone makes, and I go, "Oh, that's interesting," and it'll show up later. Or what happens if there's a dog running down the street, and my neighbor, it was a neighbor, and if I, whatever, they know they do this, so their gate, I don't know, gate doesn't latch well, so their dogs are always running around, and sometimes they come to my window to let me know they're outside, which is, I'm telling you, it happens a lot. So I come outside, bring them inside, get them some water, get them situated, but they come to the window to tell me they're out there. What happens if I wasn't home one day for that? What happens? Now that's frightening, and I can make it as frightening as I want to make it, or I can make it just be an anecdote as part of character building. But those things are how I come up with any idea, those moments of life.
I saw someone else had I had this down earlier, but I flew past it. Some of the elements of psychological horror.
Well, psychological horror is different from quiet horror, and I don't know if everybody realizes that. Quiet is a slow build. Psychological horror also is, but quiet is almost, that it almost sets itself up for a jump scare, but there's no jump scare. So you know what I mean? So it just keeps going with that sort of dread. Psychological horror is where the characters like trying to figure out what's happening. They don't know if it's going on in their head or if everyone is seeing the ghost, or is it not a ghost and I'm sick now? Something is wrong with me. I've got, an aneurysm, or I am imagining things. Stress is bringing this on, or no one actually said that, or the devil has come up and tapped me on the shoulder. What's really happening? And the confusion that creates the tension, that creates the mystery, because they've got to figure it out. This is a puzzle to solve. And it's not easy, right? I mean, if telecommuting is a purely psychological puzzle, and you may think you know what's going on until you don't, and it's difficult because you've always got to think as the author, you've always got to think towards the end game. So what I do is I write my end game first. That might have been someone else's question. Usually, I'm writing a novel now where I'm trying to write the end. I've written a note for the end. I'm a pantser, so the fact that I wrote a note for the end is kind of amazing. But I try to write my ending first, and then I'll go back because I know where I want to end up.
Well, that was really interesting. I think everyone here had a wonderful time tonight. And Lisa, thank you so much for being here. If you don't mind hanging out for just a second, we'll thank you again once we close out. And for everyone else, there are, in addition to the sessions I mentioned earlier, there are new sessions being added every day in Fictionary community. A lot of free sessions out there, and just an amazing lineup. So take advantage of that, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you everyone for coming, and have a great night.
Nice meeting you. Thank you.